It was the muffled thuds that woke me from my restless slumber. Disoriented, I blinked at the blinking red numbers on my nightstand. 2:17 a.m. The noise persisted, followed by what sounded like hurried footsteps. Adrenaline surged through my body as I grabbed my phone, ready to call the cops. Before I could dial, a frantic knocking erupted from my front door. "Arya, are you all right? Open up." It was Mr. Halgren, my elderly neighbor from across the hall. Clutching my robe tightly, I rushed to the door and peered through the peephole. His face was etched with concern. "What's going on?" I asked, unlocking the door. "I heard strange noises from your brother's place next door," he said, his voice quivering. "It sounded like someone was breaking in." My stomach knotted at the mention of my estranged brother, Elric. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the ugly inheritance dispute after our parents' tragic deaths. But the mere thought of him rekindled the bitterness that still simmered inside me. Pushing those feelings aside, I followed Mr. Halgren down the dimly lit hallway. As we approached Elric's apartment, an eerie silence filled the air. I peered through the crack of his partially open door and gasped. The place was ransacked, furniture overturned, drawers emptied, and belongings strewn across the floor. My heart raced as I instinctively clutched Mr. Halgren's arm. "We should call the police," he urged. But before I could respond, a sickening realization hit me. If Elric's place was broken into, what about mine? Rushing back, I flung open my apartment door and froze. The scene that greeted me was like a punch to the gut. My sanctuary, the space I had so carefully curated, was in complete disarray. "Oh, dear Lord," Mr. Halgren muttered behind me. I stumbled inside, surveying the chaos. Picture frames shattered, books scattered, cushions ripped open. It was as if a tornado had ripped through. But one thing immediately caught my eye: the glowing screen of my laptop, still intact amidst the wreckage. With trembling hands, I lifted the device and felt my world shift. Dozens of emails, all sent from my account, detailed confidential information about my employer's cybersecurity protocols. It was a damning trail of corporate espionage, and it was undeniably linked to me. My legs buckled, and I sank to the floor, clutching the laptop to my chest. Someone had framed me, and deep down, I knew exactly who it was. The question was why? And how far would Elric go to destroy me? As the initial shock wore off, my mind raced to make sense of the incriminating evidence staring back at me. Corporate espionage was a federal offense, one that could land me in prison for years. But why would Elric go to such lengths to frame me? The answer hit me like a ton of bricks. The inheritance money from our parents. After their untimely deaths in a car accident 5 years ago, the bulk of their considerable estate had been left to me. Elric had always resented that decision, claiming our parents favored me, but the truth was, his reckless spending and mounting debts made him an untrustworthy custodian of the family's wealth. With a few clicks, I accessed the email trail, my hands shaking as I scanned the damning messages. Each one contained sensitive data that could cripple my employer's network security, product roadmaps, customer lists, even source code for their flagship software. And they were all linked back to my corporate account. "This can't be happening," I muttered, bile rising in my throat. "What is it, dear?" Mr. Halgren asked, his voice laced with concern. I turned the laptop toward him, revealing the incriminating messages. "Someone's trying to frame me for stealing company secrets." His eyes widened as he read through the emails. But who would do such a thing? The answer was painfully obvious, but I couldn't bring myself to voice the name. Instead, I pulled up the account logs, tracing the origin of the messages. To my dismay, the timestamps aligned with the time frame Mr. Halgren had mentioned, when he heard noises coming from Elric's apartment. "Arya?" Mr. Halgren prodded gently. I swallowed hard, the bitter truth leaving an acrid taste in my mouth. It was Elric. He broke into my place and sent these emails to make it look like I'm selling company secrets. The elderly man's brow furrowed in disbelief. "But why would your own brother do such a terrible thing?" A mirthless laugh escaped my lips. "Money, greed, jealousy, take your pick." I shook my head, disgusted. "He's always resented that our parents left the inheritance to me instead of him." Memories of our last explosive argument flooded back, Elric's words cutting like knives. "You don't deserve a penny of what's rightfully mine. I'll make you pay for this, Arya. Mark my words." At the time, I'd brushed off his threats as empty tantrums. But now, as I stared at the damning evidence, the true depths of his depravity became chillingly clear. "We need to call the authorities," Mr. Halgren urged, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I wanted nothing more than to have Elric arrested, to see him pay for his betrayal. But something held me back, a nagging voice in my head that whispered of another way, a path that would ensure his downfall was complete and utterly merciless. Clenching my jaw, I made a decision that would set in motion a vicious game of revenge, one that would force Elric to reap the consequences of his actions in the most devastating way possible. "Not yet," I said, my voice steely with resolve. "I have a better idea." Over the next few days, I threw myself into an investigation to uncover the full scope of Elric's treachery. Using my cybersecurity skills, I traced the origin of the incriminating emails back to his apartment's Wi-Fi network. But that was just the beginning. Digging deeper, I discovered security footage from the building's parking garage that confirmed my worst suspicions. The grainy video showed Elric slipping into my apartment complex around 10 p.m., just a few hours before Mr. Halgren had heard the disturbance next door. My blood boiled as I watched my brother's familiar figure furtively making his way inside, no doubt to plant the evidence that would frame me for corporate espionage. The sheer, calculated nature of his betrayal left me reeling. I knew I needed to confront him, to look him in the eye and demand an explanation for his despicable actions. But part of me feared what I might find lurking beneath the surface, the true depths of his depravity. Still, I steeled my resolve and arranged to meet him at a nearby cafe, neutral territory where he wouldn't feel cornered. As I waited at a secluded table, my fingers drummed an anxious rhythm on the tabletop. The bell above the door jingled, and Elric sauntered in, his expression a mask of casual indifference, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted around the room before finally settling on me. "Arya?" He greeted flatly, sliding into the chair across from me. "It's been a while." "Cut the crap, Elric," I snapped, shoving my laptop across the table. The incriminating emails were displayed in all their damning glory. "You broke into my place and tried to frame me for selling company secrets. Why?" For a moment, his facade cracked, and I glimpsed the churning mixture of rage and desperation that simmered beneath. But then, just as quickly, he regained his composure, his lips curling into a sneer. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he spat, leaning forward menacingly. "Always the perfect one, Mommy and Daddy's golden child. Well, let me tell you something. That inheritance should have been mine." I recoiled at the venom in his voice, but he wasn't done. "Do you have any idea what I've been through?" he hissed. "Drowning in debt, struggling to make ends meet while you're living the high life off our parents' money. You didn't deserve a penny of what they left you." His words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and I found myself struggling to breathe. This wasn't just about greed or jealousy. It was a twisted, all-consuming hatred that had festered for years. "So you decided to try and send me to prison?" I countered, incredulous. "You're sick, Elric, truly sick." He let out a harsh laugh, devoid of any mirth. "Prison would have been too good for you. No, I wanted to see you utterly ruined, stripped of everything you hold dear. That inheritance was supposed to be my salvation, my way out of this hellhole I've been living in. And you stole that from me." In that moment, I saw the true depths of his malice, and a part of me shriveled inside. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about stripping him of the power he so desperately craved, dismantling his delusions of entitlement until he had nothing left. As I stared into the abyss of his blackened soul, I knew there was no turning back. The game was on, and I would stop at nothing to ensure Elric's downfall was absolute. In the days following my confrontation with Elric, a cold determination settled over me. His twisted sense of entitlement and utter disregard for the consequences of his actions had solidified my resolve. He needed to be stopped, and I was the only one who could do it. But I couldn't just turn him in, not after the lengths he'd gone to frame me. No, I needed a more surgical strike, a plan that would dismantle his delusions of grandeur and leave him with nowhere to run. Digging deeper into his activities, I uncovered a trail of shady dealings and black market transactions, a desperate attempt to fund his lavish lifestyle through illegal means. Suddenly, his obsession with the inheritance money made sickening sense. It wasn't just about greed. It was about fueling his criminal enterprises. With each new discovery, the pieces fell into place, revealing the true extent of his depravity. He was a cancer, slowly spreading his poison through our family's legacy, and I was the only one with the skills to excise that malignant growth once and for all. I began meticulously documenting every shred of evidence, building an airtight case against him. Bank statements, encrypted communications, even grainy surveillance footage, nothing was left uncovered. It was all part of a larger strategy, a chess game where I held the advantage of foresight and preparation. As the weeks ticked by, I could sense Elric's growing unease, the way his eyes would dart around whenever we crossed paths, as if he knew the walls were closing in. But still, he maintained his facade of arrogance, convinced that his misdeeds were safely hidden from view. Little did he know that I was merely biding my time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. That chance came in the form of a family gathering, one of those obligatory affairs where distant relatives would congregate and exchange forced pleasantries. Elric, ever the opportunist, saw it as a chance to flaunt his ill-gotten wealth, parading around like a peacock in his designer suit and flashy watch. But I had other plans. Carefully, I began weaving a web of subtle revelations, dropping breadcrumbs of information about Elric's shady dealings in hushed conversations with our more influential relatives. A whispered comment here, a pointed glance there, each carefully calculated to plant the seeds of suspicion. And of course, I made sure Elric was always within earshot, close enough to catch the murmurs of an impending investigation, the hints of his empire crumbling around him. I could see the cracks forming in his carefully constructed veneer, the beads of sweat forming on his brow as paranoia took root. With each passing hour, his forced laughter became more strained, his movements more erratic. By the time the evening drew to a close, Elric was a shell of his former self, his once cocky swagger replaced by a haunted look of desperation. As he made his way out, our eyes locked for a brief moment, and I knew he could see the triumph glinting in my gaze. The game was nearing its climax, and I held all the cards. All that was left was to sit back and watch as Elric's world unraveled, the consequences of his actions finally catching up to him in the most poetic of ways. The weeks following the family gathering were a masterclass in psychological warfare. With each passing day, I could see the toll my carefully orchestrated revelations were taking on Elric. The once cocky swagger had given way to a perpetual state of unease, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. And I was more than happy to oblige, strategically leaking just enough information to keep the pressure mounting. A whispered conversation here, a pointed look there, each one designed to reinforce the growing paranoia that his world was crumbling around him. It was a delicate dance, one that required equal parts patience and precision. Too much, too soon, and he might bolt, scattering his misdeeds to the wind. But too little, and the fear might dissipate, allowing him to regain his footing. So I bided my time, methodically tightening the noose until the slightest movement would spell his undoing. The breaking point came one evening as I was leaving the office. My phone buzzed with a frantic call from Elric, his voice a strangled whisper on the other end. "Arya, please, you have to help me." I could barely contain my smirk as I replied, feigning ignorance. "Help you with what, exactly?" There was a pause, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his desperate mind, weighing the pros and cons of confiding in me. It's about the stuff I've been involved with," he finally admitted, his words laced with thinly veiled panic. "The illegal dealings, the black market trades, everything. Someone's on to me, Arya. I don't know how, but they know." A twisted sense of satisfaction unfurled in my chest at the sound of his franticness. This was it, the moment I'd been meticulously orchestrating for weeks. The trap was sprung, and Elric was caught squarely in its jaws. "Well, well, well," I murmured, savoring the moment. "It seems the tables have turned, dear brother." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, and I could envision his eyes widening in horrified realization. "You," he stammered, the word thick with accusation. "You did this. You set me up." A low, humorless chuckle escaped my lips. "I didn't set you up, Elric. I merely provided the rope for you to hang yourself with. A rope expertly woven from your own misdeeds and insatiable greed." There was a beat of silence, and then his voice returned, low and pleading. "Arya, please, you have to help me. I'm your brother, flesh and blood. Whatever I've done, I'll make it right, I swear. Just don't let them take me. His desperate pleas should have stirred something within me, some lingering shred of familial loyalty. But as I stood there, bathed in the flickering glow of street lamps, all I felt was a cold, steely resolve. You brought this on yourself, Elric, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth or compassion. And now you'll face the consequences of your actions alone. With that, I ended the call, leaving him to stew in the bitter juices of his own making. The endgame was in motion, and there was no turning back. In the days that followed, the authorities closed in like a vice, meticulously dismantling Elric's criminal empire piece by piece. And through it all, I watched from the sidelines, a silent spectator to his downfall, reveling in the sweet taste of justice being served. The sound of the doorbell pierced the tranquil silence of my apartment, jolting me from my reverie. With a resigned sigh, I already knew who it was. Sure enough, when I opened the door, Elric stood on the other side, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled and haggard. His eyes were sunken, rimmed with dark circles, and his expensive suit hung loosely from his frame. You have to help me, Arya, he rasped, his voice a mere shadow of its former arrogant timbre. They're closing in, and I don't know what to do. I regarded him coolly, unmoved by his desperate plea. And why? Pray tell, should I lift a finger to help you? Elric's face contorted into a mask of anguish, his pride finally crumbling under the weight of his dire circumstances. Because I'm your brother, damn it! We're family! A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Family? You forfeited any claim to that when you tried to frame me and steal what little I had left of our parents' legacy. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment I almost felt a twinge of pity. Almost. I was desperate, Arya, he pleaded, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. You have to understand, I was drowning in debt, and the inheritance was my only way out. I never meant for things to go this far. I arched an eyebrow, unconvinced. And the corporate espionage? The black market dealings? Were those acts of desperation too? Elric flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor in shame. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But I'm paying for them, Arya. Isn't that enough? Shaking my head, I fixed him with a steely glare. No, Elric. It's not enough. Not even close. His head snapped up, eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fear. What are you saying? I'm saying that you brought this upon yourself, I stated, my voice hardening. You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it. The authorities are closing in, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Elric's face crumpled, and for a moment I thought he might actually break down and cry. But then, like a switch being flipped, his expression hardened, and a familiar glint of defiance flashed in his eyes. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He spat, his tone laced with venom. Watching me squirm, seeing me brought low. Well, let me tell you something, sister dearest. I'm not going down without a fight. I met his gaze unflinchingly, unimpressed by his bravado. It's over, Elric. Your little criminal empire is crumbling, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. He opened his mouth, no doubt to hurl another venomous retort. But the sound of approaching sirens cut him off. His head whipped around, eyes widening in panic as the wail of the sirens grew louder. This isn't over, he hissed, backing away from my door. You haven't seen the last of me, Arya. But even as the words left his lips, I could see the fear flickering in his eyes. He knew it was a hollow threat, a desperate attempt to cling to whatever shred of power he had left. As the police cars screeched to a halt outside my building, Elric turned and bolted, disappearing into the night like a cornered rat fleeing from the light. And in that moment, I felt a sense of profound satisfaction wash over me. The game was finally over, and I had won. Elric's downfall was complete, and he had no one to blame but himself. The weeks following Elric's desperate visit were a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, the authorities had wasted no time in dismantling his criminal enterprise, leaving no stone unturned in their pursuit of justice. I found myself being called in for questioning, forced to recount every sordid detail of my brother's misdeeds. It was a cathartic experience, purging the festering wound of his betrayal with each damning revelation. Through it all, Elric remained defiant, lashing out at anyone and everyone within his reach. His once charming facade had been stripped away, revealing the true depths of his malice and depravity. The trial itself was a media circus. with reporters and camera crews swarming the courthouse like vultures circling a carcass. Elric, of course, played it up for the cameras, alternating between proclamations of innocence and vitriolic tirades against me. But in the end, the evidence was too overwhelming, the trail of breadcrumbs I had carefully laid too intricate to unravel. One by one, the charges were read: corporate espionage, fraud, racketeering, and a litany of other offenses that would make even the most hardened criminal blanch. And through it all, Elric maintained his arrogant sneer, as if daring the world to try and break him. That is, until the verdict was announced. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as the judge cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the gathered spectators before finally settling on my brother. On the charges of corporate espionage, fraud, racketeering, and numerous counts of illegal black market dealings, this court finds the defendant, Elric Lane, guilty on all counts. The words hung in the air like a suffocating fog, and for a moment I thought Elric might actually collapse. His face drained of color, his mouth working soundlessly as the full weight of the verdict crashed down upon him. But then, just as quickly as it had come, the moment passed. His features hardened, and he fixed me with a look of pure unadulterated hatred. "You did this?" he hissed, straining against the bailiffs who were already moving to escort him from the courtroom. "You're the one who destroyed everything, Arya. You'll pay for this, I swear to God." His venomous words were met with stoic silence from the gallery, and I merely held his gaze, unflinching. In that moment, I felt no satisfaction, no sense of triumph or vindication. Just a profound sense of relief that the nightmare was finally over. The weeks and months that followed were a blur of sentencing hearings and legal proceedings, each one hammering another nail into the coffin of Elric's once promising future. He was slapped with a hefty prison sentence, as well as crippling fines and restitutions that would ensure he would never again taste the lavish lifestyle he had so coveted. And through it all, I remained a silent observer, watching as the brother I had once loved was slowly stripped of everything: his wealth, his freedom, his very identity. It was a bitter victory, to be sure, but a necessary one. Elric's greed and envy had poisoned our family's legacy, and the only way to excise that malignant growth was to cut it out, root and stem. As I sat in the courtroom gallery, watching him be led away in shackles, I felt a strange sense of finality wash over me. The chapter of my life that had been defined by his malevolence was finally closed, and I was free to move on, to forge a new path, unburdened by the weight of his betrayal. It was a bittersweet feeling, tempered by the lingering sorrow of what might have been, had he chosen a different path. But in the end, Elric had made his bed, and now he would have to lie in it, alone, with nothing but the bitter taste of karma to keep him company. Months ticked by, the weight of Elric's downfall gradually lifting from my shoulders with each passing day. It was a strange feeling, this newfound lightness, as if a dark cloud had finally parted, allowing the warmth of the sun to wash over me once again. I found myself rediscovering simple pleasures I had long taken for granted: the freedom to come and go as I pleased without the specter of his malice looming overhead, the ability to surround myself with people who genuinely cared for me, not just what I could provide them. It was a rebirth of sorts, a chance to shed the baggage of my past and forge a new path forward, one untainted by the bitter aftertaste of betrayal. Of course, there were still moments when the memories would come creeping back, uninvited guests at the party of my newfound contentment. But those fleeting pangs of anger or sorrow were quickly tempered by the knowledge that I had emerged victorious, that Elric's twisted machinations had ultimately been his undoing. In many ways, it was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to weather even the most devastating of storms and come out stronger on the other side. It was a lesson I carried with me as I embarked on the next chapter of my life, leaving the city that had been the backdrop for so much turmoil and striking out in search of greener pastures. My newfound independence manifested itself in the form of a burgeoning cybersecurity consulting firm, a venture that allowed me to channel my skills and expertise into something truly meaningful. And with each successful project, each satisfied client, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that had long been denied me. But perhaps the greatest source of fulfillment came in the form of mentoring young women just starting out in the field, imparting not just technical knowledge, but also the hard-won lessons of perseverance and self-belief that had carried me through my darkest hours. It was a full-circle moment, a chance to pay forward the kindness and support that had once been so desperately lacking in my own life. And so as the sun began to dip below the horizon on another eventful day, I found myself reflecting on the winding path that had brought me to this point, the triumphs, the heartaches, and everything in between. The sound of the doorbell pulled me from my reverie, and I rose to answer it, a faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Mr. Halgren?" I greeted warmly, ushering the elderly man inside. "Right on time, as always," he chuckled, his eyes twinkling with mirth. "You know me, Arya. Punctuality is my middle name." As I led him to the dining room, already set for our weekly dinner ritual, I couldn't help but feel a swell of gratitude for his unwavering presence throughout the ordeal with Elric. He had been my rock, my anchor in the storm, and for that I would be forever grateful. "So," he said, settling into his chair with a contented sigh, "how's the new business venture coming along?" I felt a genuine smile spread across my face as I launched into an enthusiastic update, the weight of my past finally lifting as I looked ahead to the boundless possibilities that awaited. It was a new beginning, a fresh start untainted by the shadows of my brother's malice. And as I sat there, basking in the warmth of Mr. Halgren's company, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, unbowed and unbroken. For the first time in a long time, I was truly free. "You're overreacting, as always. Can't you just get over it and move on?" Bryce's dismissive words hit me like a slap across the face. I stared at him in disbelief, my chest tightening as the all-too-familiar frustration boiled within me. How many times had I pleaded with him to understand what I was going through with my health issues? How many nights did I cry myself to sleep, longing for his compassion and support? "Get over it," I echoed, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Bryce, I'm in constant pain. The fatigue is crippling. I can't just get over a chronic condition that modern medicine still doesn't fully comprehend." Bryce rolled his eyes, his expression a mixture of annoyance and indifference. Yeah, I've heard it all before. You really need to stop using that as an excuse for everything." My hands trembled as a wave of anger washed over me. An excuse? Did he truly believe I was making up the suffering I endured day after day, year after year? "You know what? I'm done," I said, my voice quivering with pent-up emotion. "I'm done trying to make you understand something you clearly have no interest in comprehending." Bryce scoffed and turned his attention back to the television, effectively dismissing me and my struggles once again. I stormed out of the living room, fighting back tears of frustration and hurt. As I made my way to the bedroom, memories of our once loving relationship flooded my mind. Where was the man who had vowed to love and support me through sickness and health? The one who had held me close and promised to always be by my side? That man was long gone, replaced by this shell of a person who seemed to care more about maintaining the perfect facade than truly being there for his wife. I collapsed onto the bed, burying my face in the pillow as sobs racked my body. How had we come to this? How had the love and understanding we once shared disintegrated into this bitter, toxic dynamic? As I lay there, a newfound determination took root within me. I couldn't continue living like this, constantly invalidated and disrespected by the person who was supposed to be my partner in life. Enough was enough. I sat up, wiping away the tears, and reached for the journal I had been keeping over the past few years. With trembling hands, I began to document this latest incident, determined to gather evidence of Bryce's emotional abuse. The dismissive comments, the lack of empathy, the constant belittling of my struggles, I would record it all. This would be the start of my journey towards reclaiming my dignity and self-worth. I would no longer be a victim, cowering in the face of Bryce's cruelty. It was time to take a stand, to expose the truth, and to seek justice for the years of pain and neglect I had endured. The words flowed from my pen, fueled by a potent mix of anger, heartache, and a newfound sense of resolve. This was the final straw, the catalyst for the upheaval that was about to unfold. I was done being the silent, suffering wife. It was time for Bryce to face the consequences of his actions. I should have seen the signs earlier, but love can blind even the most perceptive of souls. Bryce and I had been a perfect match in the beginning, two kindred spirits, united in our hopes and dreams for the future. We'd feed off each other's energy, our laughter filling the air as we built the foundation of what we thought would be an unbreakable bond. How naive I had been. The first crack appeared shortly after our wedding, when I began exhibiting strange symptoms that no doctor could properly diagnose. The debilitating fatigue, the widespread pain, the cognitive issues. They all remained an unsolvable mystery, an invisible enemy waging war on my body and mind. At first, Bryce was sympathetic, assuring me that we would get through this together. In sickness and in health, remember, he would say, holding me close as I cried from the frustration of not understanding what was happening to me. Those tender moments became rarer as the years passed, and my condition only worsened. Bryce grew increasingly distant, frustrated by the lack of a clear solution. His patience wore thin, and the man I had fallen in love with slowly faded away, replaced by someone cold and callous. "Quit making excuses and pull yourself together," he snapped one day when I struggled to complete a simple household chore. "You're letting this supposed illness control your life." Yeah, I tried to explain, to make him understand the genuine anguish I was experiencing, but he would hear none of it. In his eyes, I had become a burden, a blight on the perfect life he had envisioned for us. Outward appearances meant everything to Bryce. He couldn't bear the thought of our family being perceived as anything less than perfect, even as our son Derek grew increasingly aware of the turmoil brewing beneath the surface. "Why is Dad always so angry with you?" Derek asked me once, his eyes full of concern. I forced a smile, not wanting to tarnish his image of his father. "It's nothing, sweetheart. He's just under a lot of stress at work." The lies piled up, each one a brick in the facade Bryce was so desperate to maintain. We were the perfect family, with the perfect house and the perfect life. At least, that's what we wanted the world to believe. Behind closed doors, the reality was far more sinister. "You're pathetic, you know that?" Bryce snarled at me one evening after I had spent the day bedridden, too weak and in too much pain to function. "This is just a convenient way for you to be lazy and avoid your responsibilities." His words cut deeper than any knife, reopening the wounds of inadequacy that his emotional abuse had inflicted over the years. I wanted to scream, to hurl every ounce of anguish back in his face, but the strength had long since been drained from me. So I remained silent, my tears the only outward display of the turmoil raging within. That's when I knew the man I had married was gone, consumed by his obsession with maintaining the illusion of perfection. The love and support I had once treasured had been replaced by disdain and contempt, all because I couldn't meet his warped expectations. In that moment, a small spark of defiance ignited within me, a glimmer of determination that would grow into an all-consuming blaze. I wouldn't stay trapped in this toxic cycle any longer. One way or another, I would strip away Bryce's carefully constructed facade and expose the ugliness that festered beneath. He would face the consequences of his actions, of the years of emotional torment he had inflicted upon me. The road ahead would be arduous, but I knew in my heart that it was the only path to reclaiming my dignity and self-worth. The mask of perfection would shatter, and the truth would finally be laid bare, no matter the cost. The facade Bryce had so carefully constructed was beginning to crumble. As my health deteriorated further, it became impossible for me to keep up the charade of being the perfect wife and homemaker. Simple tasks like cooking and cleaning left me utterly drained, my body feeling like a leadweight that refused to cooperate. Of course, this only added fuel to Bryce's disdain. "What's the point of having you around if you can't even take care of basic household duties?" he sneered, surveying the pile of unwashed dishes in the sink. I wanted to explain, to make him understand the sheer effort it took for me just to get through each day, but I knew it would fall on deaf ears. Bryce had made up his mind about my condition long ago. In his eyes, it was nothing more than a convenient excuse. "I'm sorry," I mustered, hating how weak and defeated I sounded. "I'll try harder, I promise." Bryce scoffed and shook his head in disgust. "Save your empty promises. You've been trying harder for years, yet nothing ever changes." The venom in his words cut deep, but I remained silent, too emotionally and physically drained to engage in another fruitless argument. As the weeks passed, Bryce's insults and complaints escalated, each one chipping away at what little self-worth I had left. I found solace in my journal, pouring out the anguish and frustration that I couldn't voice aloud. It was during one of these writing sessions that Derek knocked on my bedroom door, a concerned look etched on his face. "Mom, are you okay? I heard Dad yelling at you again." I fought back the tears that threatened to spill and forced a reassuring smile. "Everything's fine, honey. Your father's just been under a lot of stress lately." Derek didn't look convinced, but he nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a sadness that no child should ever have to bear. As he left, I couldn't help but wonder how much of Bryce's behavior he had witnessed over the years. Had I been naive in thinking I could shield him from the harsh reality of our crumbling marriage? That night, as Bryce slept soundly beside me, I stayed awake, my mind racing with a newfound determination. I couldn't continue living like this, constantly demeaned and belittled by the man who was supposed to love and cherish me. Enough was enough. I reached for my journal, the pages now filled with a meticulous documentation of Bryce's emotional abuse. Every cutting remark, every dismissive gesture, every act of cruelty laid bare in ink. As I flipped through the pages, a sense of empowerment washed over me. This was my evidence, my ammunition in the battle I was about to wage against the man who had made my life a living hell. I wouldn't be the silent, suffering wife any longer. It was time to take action, to expose Bryce for the monster he had become and seek justice for the years of pain and neglect he had inflicted upon me. The first step would be to confide in my sister, Jenna. She had always been my rock, my unwavering support system through the darkest of times. With her by my side, I knew I would have the strength to face whatever lay ahead. A plan began to form in my mind, the pieces slowly falling into place. I would gather every shred of evidence, every damning proof of Bryce's vile behavior, until I had an airtight case against him. Then, and only then, would I strike, shattering his carefully constructed facade and exposing the ugliness that festered beneath. It would be a long and arduous road, but I was ready to fight. For too long, I had been the victim, cowering in fear and shame. But no more. This time, justice would be mine. Our 20th wedding anniversary should have been a joyous occasion, a celebration of the love and commitment that had carried us through 2 decades of marriage. Instead, it became a painful reminder of how far Bryce and I had drifted apart. He had insisted on going out to an upscale restaurant, wanting to maintain the facade of a happy, successful couple in front of our friends and family. I had reluctantly agreed, knowing full well that any objection on my part would only ignite another heated argument. As I slowly made my way down the stairs, the simple act of getting dressed and ready had left me utterly drained. Bryce was waiting at the bottom, drumming his fingers impatiently against his watch. "It's about time," he grumbled, eyeing my weary appearance with disdain. "We're already running late." I mustered an apologetic smile, too exhausted to offer any excuses. We made our way to the restaurant in silence, the tension between us palpable. The evening only grew more excruciating as it progressed. Bryce basked in the attention of our guests, regaling them with tales of his career successes, while I sat quietly, sipping water to quell the nausea that had taken hold. At one point, our friend Jennifer turned to me with a warm smile. "Marla, you must be so proud of Bryce and everything he's accomplished." Before I could respond, Bryce cut in with a bitter chuckle. If only she put in half as much effort into our marriage as I do at work. The table fell silent, a collective tension hanging in the air. I felt the blood drain from my face as Bryce's words sank in, each one a dagger to my already fragile heart. "Excuse me?" I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. Bryce shook his head in mock disappointment. "Come on, Marla. We all know you've been using your little condition as an excuse to be lazy and neglect your duties as a wife." The venom in his tone was unmistakable, laying bare the contempt he harbored for me and my struggles. I wanted to scream, to hurl his cruelty back in his face, but the shock had rendered me mute. Our friends and family shifted uncomfortably, averting their gazes as the once celebratory atmosphere turned toxic. No one dared to intervene, to call out Bryce's abhorrent behavior. He leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "See? She can't even defend herself. Pathetic." Those words would haunt me for years to come, searing themselves into my memory like a brand. In that moment, everything became crystallized. The years of emotional abuse, the gaslighting, the utter disregard for my well-being. As I sat there, humiliated and defeated, something within me shifted. A fire ignited in the depths of my soul, a burning rage that had been simmering for far too long. Enough was enough. I would no longer be Bryce's punching bag, his victim to be ridiculed and demeaned at his whim. The gloves were coming off, and I would stop at nothing to bring him to his knees, to make him suffer as he had made me suffer for so long. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, my mind already plotting my vengeance. Bryce continued to revel in his cruelty, oblivious to the storm brewing within me. As we arrived home, I went straight to my room, locking the door behind me. I reached for my journal, my hands trembling, as I began to document every agonizing detail of the night's events. This would be the tipping point, the catalyst that would set my plan into motion. Bryce had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, and he would pay dearly for his transgressions. I would gather every shred of evidence, every recorded instance of his emotional and psychological torture. Then, when the time was right, I would unleash it all upon him, shattering his world and leaving him to contend with the consequences of his actions. No more suffering in silence, no more being the victim. It was time for Bryce to face the wrath he had so recklessly provoked. In the days following our disastrous anniversary dinner, I could feel a shift taking place within me. The years of pent-up anger and resentment had finally reached a boiling point, igniting a fire that burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns. Bryce, oblivious as ever, carried on as if nothing had happened. He went about his daily routine, leaving for work each morning with a casual "see you later" tossed over his shoulder. Meanwhile, I stewed in my righteous fury, meticulously documenting every instance of his cruelty in my journal. It was during one of these writing sessions that Jenna stopped by unannounced. She took one look at my reddened eyes and the turmoil etched into my features before enveloping me in a tight embrace. "Oh, Marla," she murmured, her voice laced with concern. "What's going on?" I pulled away, steeling myself against the torrent of emotion that threatened to spill forth. "It's Bryce," I began, the words tumbling out in a rush. He humiliated me, Jenna, in front of everyone at our anniversary dinner." Jenna's brow furrowed as I recounted the painful details, her expression darkening with each word. By the time I had finished, her hands were balled into tight fists, trembling with barely contained rage. "That bastard," she hissed, her eyes blazing with a protective fury. "How could he treat you like that? After everything you've been through?" I shook my head, feeling a sudden surge of determination. "I can't live like this anymore, Jenna. The emotional abuse, the constant belittling, it has to stop." Jenna nodded, her jaw set in a firm line. "You're right. Enough is enough. What are you going to do?" A plan had already begun to take shape in my mind, a meticulously crafted blueprint for revenge. "I'm going to gather evidence," I explained, my voice steady and resolute. "Every recording, every journal entry, every shred of proof of Bryce's cruelty. Then, when the time is right, I'm going to unleash it all and watch his world crumble around him." Jenna's eyes widened, a mixture of shock and admiration flickering across her features. "Marla, are you sure about this? This is a nuclear option. There's no going back once you pull the trigger." I nodded, my jaw clenched with grim determination. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Bryce needs to face the consequences of his actions, of the years of emotional torture he's put me through. He needs to be exposed for the monster he truly is. A slow smile spread across Jenna's face, a fierce pride radiating from her very being. "Okay, sis, I'm in. Whatever you need, I've got your back." Relief washed over me, knowing that I wouldn't be facing this battle alone. With Jenna by my side, I felt an overwhelming sense of strength, a certainty that I would emerge victorious. Over the next few weeks, we worked tirelessly, gathering every scrap of evidence we could find. Journals, recordings, photographs, nothing was left out. We built an ironclad case against Bryce, one that would leave no room for doubt or denial. As our arsenal grew, so too did my sense of empowerment. The fear and shame that had once shackled me began to dissipate, replaced by a burning desire for justice and retribution. Bryce remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing, carrying on with his daily routine as if nothing were amiss. He would sneer at me whenever our paths crossed, his lips curling in a contemptuous sneer that only fueled my determination. "What's the matter, Marla?" he would taunt. "Still wallowing in self-pity, I see." I would meet his gaze, unflinching, biting back the biting retort that danced on the tip of my tongue. Soon, I told myself. Soon, he would pay for every ounce of pain and humiliation he had inflicted upon me. As the final pieces of our plan fell into place, I felt a sense of exhilaration coursing through my veins. The day of reckoning was fast approaching, and Bryce had no idea what was in store. He had made the mistake of underestimating me, of believing that I would cower and submit to his abuse forever. But no more. This time, I would be the one holding all the cards, and Bryce would learn the true meaning of suffering. The facade he had so carefully constructed was about to come crashing down, and I would be the one wielding the sledgehammer. The day of reckoning had finally arrived, and I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Jenna and I had spent weeks meticulously planning every detail, leaving no stone unturned in our quest for justice. It was the annual Wyatt family reunion, a gathering that Bryce had always insisted on attending, despite our crumbling marriage. This year, however, the event would serve as the perfect stage for his downfall. As we pulled into the driveway of my parents' home, I could see the familiar faces of extended family members already gathered on the lawn. Bryce plastered on his usual charming smile, ever the master of deception. "Remember, honey," he murmured, leaning in close, "we have to keep up appearances. No need to burden everyone with our personal issues." I fought back the urge to recoil from his touch, nodding in feigned agreement. Little did he know, the facade he had so carefully cultivated was about to be shattered beyond repair. We mingled with the crowd, making small talk and accepting well wishes from relatives we hadn't seen in ages. All the while, Jenna and I exchanged covert glances, silently signaling that it was time to put our plan into motion. After the initial greetings had concluded, Jenna cleared her throat, calling for everyone's attention. "If I could have a moment, please," she began, her voice ringing out across the lawn. "There's something important that needs to be addressed." Bryce shot me a quizzical look, but I remained impassive, my expression betraying nothing. "For too long, a grave injustice has been allowed to fester within our family," Jenna continued, her gaze sweeping across the gathered crowd. "An injustice that we can no longer turn a blind eye to." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the crowd, but Jenna pressed on, undeterred. "Bryce Wyatt has been emotionally and psychologically abusing his wife, Marla, for years. Today, we're going to put an end to his cruelty, once and for all." A hush fell over the gathering as Jenna's words sank in. Bryce's face contorted in a mixture of shock and outrage, but before he could interject, Jenna was already unveiling our carefully curated evidence. Audio recordings of Bryce's vicious tirades filled the air, his voice dripping with venom and contempt as he hurled insult after insult at me. Documented journal entries detailing the years of emotional torment were passed around, laying bare the depths of his cruelty. And then, the pièce de résistance, the video footage from our anniversary dinner, capturing Bryce's public humiliation in all its excruciating detail. As the scene played out on the screen, gasps and murmurs of outrage echoed through the crowd. Bryce stood frozen, his mouth agape as the carefully constructed facade he had so meticulously maintained came crashing down around him. "How could you?" My mother's voice cut through the tension, her eyes brimming with tears. "How could you treat my daughter that way?" Bryce stammered, grasping for an excuse, but no words came. He was a cornered animal, his true nature finally exposed for all to see. One by one, family members turned their backs on him, their expressions a mix of disgust and disbelief. Bryce's once charming demeanor had been stripped away, revealing the ugly truth that had been lurking beneath all along. As the weight of his actions bore down upon him, Bryce's veneer of confidence crumbled. He turned to me, his eyes pleading for mercy, for understanding. "Marla, please," he began, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "Enough," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "You've had your chance to be a decent human being, and you squandered it. Now you're going to face the consequences of your actions." Bryce opened his mouth to protest, but thought better of it. In that moment, he knew he had lost. lost the respect of his family, lost the facade of perfection he had so desperately clung to, lost any semblance of control over the situation. As he slunk away, a broken and defeated man, I felt a surge of vindication wash over me. Justice had been served, and the years of suffering and humiliation had finally been avenged. Jenna pulled me into a fierce embrace, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it, sis," she whispered. "You took that bastard down." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but for the first time in years I felt truly free. Free from the shackles of Bryce's emotional abuse, free to reclaim my life and dignity. As the crowd dispersed, offering words of support and encouragement, I knew that this was just the beginning. Bryce's downfall was merely the first step in a journey towards healing and empowerment, and I was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. In the days following the explosive family reunion, the fallout from Bryce's exposure was swift and unrelenting. His life, once so meticulously constructed to project an image of perfection, lay in shattered ruins around him. I, on the other hand, felt a sense of liberation unlike anything I had experienced before. For years I had been shackled by Bryce's emotional abuse, my spirit slowly eroded by his cruelty. But now, with the truth laid bare, I was finally free. The first order of business was securing a divorce. Jenna had put me in touch with a formidable legal team, and within a matter of days the paperwork was filed. Bryce, still reeling from the public humiliation, offered little resistance. "You're making a mistake," he muttered during one of our brief encounters, his eyes downcast and defeated. "Think about what this will do to Derek." I leveled my gaze at him, feeling no shred of sympathy for the man who had tormented me for years. "I am thinking about Derek," I replied, my voice unwavering, "and I'm doing what's best for him, removing him from an environment of toxicity and abuse." Bryce flinched as if he had been struck, but I pressed on, relentless. "You've only got yourself to blame for this, Bryce. Your actions have consequences, whether you choose to acknowledge them or not." With that, I turned and walked away, leaving him to stew in the wreckage of his own making. As news of our impending divorce spread, the backlash against Bryce intensified. Friends and colleagues who had once praised his accomplishments now distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with a man exposed as an emotional abuser. Even Derek, our once doting son, could no longer bring himself to look his father in the eye. "How could you treat Mom like that?" he asked during one of their strained encounters, his voice thick with emotion. "She sacrificed everything for this family, and you just... Words failed him, but his expression spoke volumes. The hero worship he had once held for Bryce had been shattered, replaced by a profound sense of disappointment and betrayal. Bryce, for his part, tried to cling to the tattered remnants of his former life. He lashed out at me, accusing me of turning his own family against him, of poisoning their minds with lies and deceit. "You're a vindictive, spiteful woman," he snarled during one of his tirades. "You'll regret this, Marla. Mark my words." But his threats rang hollow, devoid of the power and menace they once held. I simply stared back at him, unmoved by his pathetic attempts at intimidation. "I don't regret a thing, Bryce," I replied, my voice laced with a steely resolve. "For the first time in years, I'm living in the truth, something you've clearly never been able to handle." His face contorted in a mask of rage, but I had already turned away, leaving him to wallow in his own self-pity and delusion. With each passing day, Bryce's world continued to crumble around him. His once thriving career began to unravel as clients and business partners severed ties, unwilling to be associated with such a tarnished reputation. It was a sight to behold, watching this once proud man brought to his knees by the very demons he had unleashed upon me. And yet, I felt no pity, no shred of remorse for the suffering he now endured. This was justice, pure and simple, a reckoning long overdue. As the divorce proceedings neared their conclusion, I found myself reflecting on the long and arduous journey that had led me to this point. The years of suffering, the constant belittling and emotional abuse, the endless nights spent wondering where the man I had married had gone. But now, as I prepared to embark on a new chapter of my life, those memories seemed to fade into the distance. The shackles that had once bound me had been broken, and I was finally free to spread my wings and soar. Jenna pulled me into a fierce embrace as the final papers were signed, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and relief. "You did it, sis," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You survived the storm, and you came out stronger on the other side." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope, a belief that better days lay ahead, free from the toxicity and cruelty that had once defined my existence. As I stepped out into the world, a newfound sense of empowerment coursed through my veins. I was a survivor, a warrior who had faced the darkness head-on and emerged victorious. And Bryce? Well, he was nothing more than a footnote in my story, a mere obstacle that had been overcome, a reminder of the strength and resilience that burned within me. The future was mine to shape, and I intended to seize it with both hands, leaving the pain and suffering of the past far behind me. A new chapter was about to begin, and I couldn't wait to see what it had in store. Chapter 8: A New Beginning. The divorce had been finalized, and with it, a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I was officially free from the shackles of Bryce's emotional abuse, free to start anew and reshape my life on my own terms. Of course, that didn't mean the process was easy. There were still hurdles to overcome, lingering scars from years of torment that would take time to heal. But I was committed to the journey, fueled by a newfound sense of determination and self-worth. The first order of business was securing a favorable settlement, one that would provide me with the financial means to build the life I deserved. Jenna's legal team had proven their mettle, negotiating a generous payout that encompassed a sizable portion of our shared assets. "You earned every penny of this, Marla," Jenna assured me as we reviewed the settlement details. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I nodded, still somewhat in disbelief that this chapter of my life was truly coming to a close. For so long I had been trapped in a cycle of fear and self-doubt, conditioned by Bryce's emotional manipulations to believe that I deserved nothing better. But now, with the evidence of his cruelty laid bare and the law on my side, I could finally break free from those toxic thought patterns. I was worthy of happiness, of respect, of building a life on my own terms. With the financial security provided by the settlement, I made the decision to invest a portion of the funds into a cause close to my heart, a foundation dedicated to supporting others suffering from the same chronic condition that had once been the catalyst for Bryce's abuse. It was a way for me to turn my pain into purpose, to ensure that no one else would have to endure the isolation and emotional torment that I had faced for so many years. "This is amazing, Mom," Derek said, his eyes shining with pride as we toured the Foundation's newly opened headquarters. "I can't think of a better way to help people and raise awareness." I pulled him into a tight embrace, overwhelmed by the surge of emotions welling up within me. For too long, I had shielded Derek from the harsh realities of my marriage, desperate to preserve his image of his father. But now, with the truth laid bare, we were able to forge a deeper connection, built on honesty and mutual respect. "Thank you, sweetheart," I murmured, fighting back tears of joy. "Your support means everything to me." As the foundation took shape and our outreach efforts began in earnest, I found myself bearing witness to the incredible resilience of the human spirit. The stories I encountered, the tales of perseverance in the face of overwhelming adversity, only served to strengthen my own resolve. I was no longer the broken, downtrodden woman who had once cowered in fear of her husband's wrath. I was a survivor, a warrior who had emerged from the ashes of emotional abuse, stronger and more determined than ever before. And Bryce? Well, his fate had been sealed the moment he chose to prioritize his own selfish desires over the well-being of his family. The once powerful businessman had become a pariah, his reputation in tatters and his professional prospects all but non-existent. I caught glimpses of him from time to time, a mere shadow of his former self, disheveled, haunted by the demons of his own making. Our paths would cross, and for a fleeting moment our eyes would meet, a silent acknowledgement of the chasm that now separated us. But I felt no pity, no remorse for the man who had inflicted so much pain and suffering upon me. This was the bed he had made for himself, and now he would lie in it, forever haunted by the consequences of his actions. As for me, I was focused on the future, a future that seemed brighter and more promising with each passing day. The foundation continued to grow, its reach extending to communities across the country, offering solace and support to those who had once felt so alone. And at the center of it all was a woman reborn, a phoenix risen from the ashes of emotional turmoil, spreading her wings and soaring towards new horizons. It was a new beginning, a fresh start that had been hard-won through years of struggle and perseverance. And as I looked ahead, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this point. The road had been long and arduous, but in the end, justice had prevailed. I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth, and for that, I would be forever grateful. A new chapter was unfolding, and I intended to embrace it wholeheartedly, leaving the pain and anguish of the past firmly behind me. The future was mine, and I couldn't wait to see what it had in store.